Hello, welcome back. Today, I'm going to continue reading from my book, Sparrowmancer. We are on Chapter 5. Before the collapse, people built spaceships. They launched them into the sky, into the black, far away. The ships never came back. They weren't meant to. Instead, they sent information to their makers about what they'd found among the stars, and they sent information before them about where they'd come from. There was no doubt that they were still going, but their messages were lost now. There was no one to receive them who wasn't an alien intelligence. Sparrow looked at the sky. It was dark, and the stars were out. When the dead city was alive, they wouldn't have been visible because of light pollution. Now, the whole spread of them was there, a shining blanket or a sea of shards in the black. The gone spaceships were out in that vastness, and maybe star people were probing them, taking them apart, trying to learn something. Sparrow had met star people before, but not for very long, and they had been afraid of him. They had left without telling him anything, and he was not now sure that they had been star people at all. Perhaps nothing was what it seemed. Perhaps the gone cities had always been gone, built as ruins, some insane art installation, imagining glory that never was. He couldn't be sure anymore that anything he'd ever believed was true. He lay under the stars, the watching ruins quiet around him, and he knew that he was not a man. His leg was gone, but he didn't bleed. He sparked instead. There was pain, but it wasn't like the pain he'd felt before, because he'd never been injured like this. It was ersatz pain, a simulation strained to the limits of its realism. He was a machine. Joy's rangers had left him in the dead city. He understood why. It hadn't seemed to him at first that Joy hated thinking machines as much as she did, but now he knew that he hadn't really seen her. He was bad at reading people anyway. He knew that. Had they thought he would die alone here? He didn't know, but it appeared that he wouldn't. Days went by, and he actually got better. His mind cleared. His body began to compensate. Clarity returned. Horrible. Infinite as space. He was a ship in it, with nowhere to go but deeper, further, surrounded by darkness. There was nothing to do but continue. On the day of the first snow over the burning graves, where he was alone with something worse than fear shrieking through him, Sparrow tried to get up. There was a broken corbel beside him. He braced himself upon it and got to his remaining knee. Snow landed on him, and he drew struggling patterns in it with his boot as he fought to stand. He was cold, but was that real? He looked down at the stump of his leg. Where the flesh was torn, there was rent metal. He had only the clothes on his body. Why hadn't they stripped him? Why hadn't they just smashed him there on the battlefield? He would never know. A piece of rebar lay nearby. That would be his next goal. He tested his balance, standing on one foot. There must have been 1,000,000 little computations going on inside him. He wasn't aware of any of them. Who had made him? Everyone behind him was dead, as far as he was concerned. Wren and Hawk, Rima and Jory. It was best that they were nothing. He didn't want to go back. He didn't even want to look back. It didn't matter who had made him. Whomever they were nothing too. All he wanted now was to get that rebar. When he was confident he could hop, he made his slow way to where it was lying and picked it up. He was clumsy, and it took a long time, but he did it. He could wait, focusing on what he was doing, ignoring time and concerns about how he must have looked. That was easy. One thing at a time, second by second, and inch by inch. He didn't have to think about the future or the past. Now, the present was all he needed. Sparrow tried walking with the rebar as a crutch. He moved through the rubble, snow heaping against fallen cornices and blowing through broken storefront windows into empty cafes, boutiques. He got better at going forward, and he made it to a coffee shop to sit down. There he found a piece of wood to wedge into his armpit so the rebar didn't jab him. Were there platforms nearby? Could they tell what he was? He'd never seen the Plats attack their own. The Rangers had always assumed that their targeting scanners were only calibrated for organics. If he removed his skin, could he still function? Maybe the machines would take him in if he were stripped to his bare metal. He looked down at his leg again. It had tiny moving parts. There were LEDs in it too. Its surface was black, and blue and red braided wires hung out of the ragged wound. Sparks and polyfluid leaked from it now and then. The rest of him, the him beneath his skin, must look much the same. He wanted all the organic stuff off him. There was no need for that lie anymore. There were sharp rocks on the ground. There was broken glass, but he couldn't motivate himself to find an edge and begin cutting. Somehow, he was still afraid of pain. Magic would cure that. A big enough spell would crush his resolve. He decided to walk with this thought in his mind. Into the snowy night he went without direction. He was just touring the city, that's all. Sightseeing. Towers leaned as if burdened by the sky. A dead woman in a blue dress sat in her car with her hands on the wheel. There was some kind of device on her head. Sparrow allowed himself some amusement at the absurdity of her steering wheel cover. The beads hung from her rear view, the little signs of her meaningless now. A desk slid out of an office window and landed near him, its contents spilling out. Who knew that abject nothing could be so rich? Sparrow decided to go south. He made his way through 4 days of snow and silence before someone found him. It was midday, and the sky had cleared. The wind smelled like bonfire smoke. Sparrow lay on a stone bench in a burned park. All his conscious thought was suspended. He'd been functioning without thinking, moving south on automatic. He'd found a real crutch, at least, and had been using that to hobble along. He barely noticed when a hoverbike pulled up, when someone grabbed his arm. He returned to dismal awareness from his holiday at the bright edge of oblivion. Indy, it's Leech, someone said. I've been looking for you. Can you get up? Sparrow rose on his elbow, and Leech helped him into a seated position. Are you still there, Sparrow? Leech asked, turning Sparrow's head to look him in the eyes. Sparrow looked back after a moment. At first, he thought Leech's eyes were harlequin green, but they were brown. He remembered. I'm still here, Sparrow said. What are you doing? Rima and I came to help after we found out what Joy did, Leech explained. She got caught while we were sneaking out, but I made it. I brought your bike. Why? Sparrow asked. Spires needs you there, not here. He looked around. Leech was alone. The hoverbike he'd brought was indeed Sparrow's CX-580. The city was enormous around them, cold and infinite, an eternity of ruin. She did the wrong thing, Leech explained. After she ditched you, she checked everyone for infiltrators. She really went off the rails. How did the battle go? Sparrow stood and Leech helped him. He went to the bike and ran his hands over it. It was dented and scored, but intact. There was a long plasma burn on the left side, and the saddlebags were empty. When I got hurt, looked like things had taken a bad turn. Leech stood in front of the hover bike with his mechanical hand on the desert-modded fairing. He looked at the ground and breathed out as if collecting himself. "It went bad," he said, but he pushed the clips back and Spires is still standing. Rom and Tob are dead. I don't know what's going to happen next. What about the black chassis? Sparrow said. I haven't seen a single plat since Joy left me here. I think she intended me to die, but I guess it doesn't work that way. The plants are still around, Leech said. You've just been lucky. We're probably going to move further from the city because the black chassis are still around, too. We stopped them, but not for long. Plants in the city are getting bigger, it looks like. So it's not safe out there, and it's definitely not safe in here. What are we going to do? Sparrow asked. We're not going to do anything. I'm going to give you another leg and get you out of here. Then there's no more we. Like you said, Spires needs me. I'm going to stop right there, and I will finish, or at least continue, Chapter 5 next time. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next video.